Welcome to the Lawyerist Podcast, a series of conversations about law practice. Each week, we talk with legal entrepreneurs and innovators about building a successful law practice in today's challenging and constantly changing legal market. And now, here are your hosts.
Hi, I'm Sam Glover.
And I'm Aaron Street, and this is episode 199 of the Lawyerist Podcast.
Holy crap.
Of the Legal Talk Network. Today we're talking with Mary Juetten about end-of-year finances.
Today's 199th podcast is brought to you by LawPay, Smokeball, New Law Business Model, and Law Clerk. We wouldn't be able to do this show without their support, so stay tuned and we'll tell you more about them.
So tomorrow is Thanksgiving.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving.
Makes me feel like this is a good moment for us to express our gratitude for all of you for sticking with us for 199 episodes of this show.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
That's a lot of podcasts we've did.
That is a lot of podcasting, and it's awesome. You know, it's one of the best things we've done. It's really rewarding to do it. It's fun to talk to all these interesting people, and it's awesome to have all of you listening and to hear your feedback from time to time.
So we're grateful that you've listened for almost 4 years now, and we've had lots of different shows in that time. I continue to avoid listening to any of our first 15 or 20 or so as we were working the kinks out of what it means to have a podcast. But after that, I feel like they're all good.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
So thanks to all of you. If you've enjoyed this show over any part of the last 4 years, we would be really appreciative if you would rate it in iTunes or share it with a friend or let us know what your favorite episodes have been. Getting your feedback is really valuable to us, and we love sharing the word about our show.
Yeah, or tell us what you want more of, what you'd love to hear differently, what you've found most valuable. It's really cool to hear back from you. So with that said, we've got a brief sponsored conversation with Dan Lear on behalf of Law Clerk, and then we'll jump into my conversation with Mary and help you get ready for the end of the year.
Hey, everybody. My name is Dan Lear. I'm the chief instigator at Right Brain Law. We are a legal technology consulting firm, and I'm here talking with Sam today in my capacity working for one of my clients, Law Clerk, an outsourcing platform where lawyers go to find freelance attorneys.
Hey, Dan, thanks for being with us again. So you wanted to talk about the Military Spouses JD Network in light of the fact that we've just been through Veterans Day.
Yeah, this is a group that I've been involved with for a number of years. I spoke at their annual summit a few years ago. I think I bumped into them a few months prior to that at an ABA event. And I think it's a group that a lot of attorneys don't know about. And these are the spouses of active duty military folks who also happen to be lawyers. And particularly as it relates to Law Clerk and sort of some of the discussions I know that you folks have been having on the podcast lately, military spouses have some pretty peculiar challenges as it relates to advancing their careers as lawyers.
Well, what are some of those challenges?
Well, I mean, most immediately, law, as we know, is a state-by-state licensed sort of organization or profession, but you can be deployed as a military spouse, or more accurately, your spouse can be deployed anywhere, really at any time.
Yeah.
And so it makes it really difficult for spouses who want to establish a career in the state where they went to law school or where they happen to have been licensed, because 6 months later, you may be in a completely different state or even in a different country.
And there's some legislation to address this based around the idea that, you can be a competent lawyer without having gone through law school or bar study in a state. So that's one of the things that people have done to address it. What does some of that legislation look like, and what are some of the solutions there?
Yeah, I'd be lying to you, Sam, if I told you I was deeply familiar with it. But I know that MSGDN has worked hard to get rule changes passed in a number of states, more than the majority, that pertain specifically to military spouse attorneys so that they can come into a new jurisdiction. And for the most part, it's a little bit like a pro hoc vice. They can practice in a limited capacity for a limited period of time without having to take the bar or go through other regulatory hoops. So that's one step, and I think a very positive one in this area.
But the other side of it is maybe there are some opportunities that are are offered in part by the rise of technology solutions such as Law Clerk that allow military spouses to just keep practicing using the jurisdiction or jurisdictions they're already licensed in. So maybe you could tell us more about that.
Totally. And if folks want to go check it out, they can go to the Law Clerk blog, which is lawclerk.legal/blog, and look for some of my posts. I've been writing actually all summer about the democratization of legal expertise, which is super nerdy
cool.
and probably not something we're going to delve into in great depth here for a few minutes. But if you read about sort of what I've said and you distill it down, what it really comes down to is this notion of legal information and legal expertise being able to flow more freely from jurisdiction to jurisdiction using technology. And that's exactly what Law Clerk facilitates, particularly for military spouses. If you're licensed in Pennsylvania, or that's even where you go to law school and then get licensed, and then all of a sudden your spouse is deployed to Texas, you can try to get licensed in Texas. Maybe you end up in a state where they're going to allow you to practice. But if you anticipate returning to Pennsylvania at some point, or let's say you have connections there or a network, or let's just say that you specialize in some specific area of law that is unique to Pennsylvania, you may want to continue to do work there. And so technologies like Law Clerk, and again, giving Law Clerk a shout out here, enables that lawyer to stay connected to their home jurisdiction.
And to continue to employ their expertise there.
No, exactly. Absolutely. So an attorney who's licensed and located in Pennsylvania can find this remote attorney and hire them and use them and leverage that Pennsylvania expertise. And this gets particularly interesting when we talk about jurisdictions where the cost of living may differ significantly, right? You could get a competent licensed California attorney who happens to be living in Georgia, say, both of us know Megan Xavier, for, at a screaming deal because they don't have to deal with the California cost of living. And that's just one example. I've gotten really, again, bringing it back to the Veterans Day piece. This military spouse community, I think, has some particular needs in the sense that they're constantly moving and really in an unexpected way. And so I think Law Clerk and technologies like it really line themselves up perfectly to help these folks. And then I just sort of nerd out for a minute. I also think this is really interesting because I personally think this is the direction the world of work is moving, where there are fewer boundaries and people want to work remotely. Perhaps they go and spend a few months with family or, relocate to some tropical or, sunnier destination for the winter. And so the ability for for this legal expertise to move more freely is really key. And so I think in some ways, these military spouses are sort of the canaries in the coal mine, if you will, for how we'll all want to practice in the future. And so having more technologies that facilitate that is only a better thing, in my opinion, a good thing.
Yeah, it's a great example of solving for the specifics, solving the problem for the general, right? Where we type on keyboards because they were created for people who are hard of hearing to communicate with one another more easily. We have phones for the same reason. So many of the great solutions, curb cuts, which allow all of us to ride our bikes up and down and scooters up and down curbs, were created for the wheelchair bound. And this is just another example of a solution that works really well for a specific community, also being a great solution for a general community. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to also just give a quick shout out to the folks at Law Clerk who have reached out to the folks at MSJDN, and they have a partnership in progress and one that I hope to see them develop such that even hiring lawyers on Law Clerk might be able to specifically select military spouses who, again, their lives are difficult enough. And so giving them a little bit more opportunity would be great. But yeah, I totally agree with that, Sam. And I'm excited to see technology finally catching up with this population that's really an untapped resource that I think could be really helpful to a lot of attorneys.
So if you listeners want to know more, if you are a military spouse or you just want some more flexibility in your working environment, or you just want to learn more about Law Clerk, go to lawclerk.legal/lawyerist to learn more and sign up. It's free. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Sam. It's been a pleasure.
I'm Mary Juetten, and I'm excited to be here today. I'm a lawyer. I recently started practicing as outside in-house counsel with Nimbus Legal, and I'm also a legal technology or technology entrepreneur. I spent the last 8 years since law school working on a company called Tracklight, and along the way I had to pull from my first career, which was as an accountant, to spend some time working on key performance indicators and data in the law.
So let me get this straight. You were an accountant, then you went to law school, then you graduated but didn't take the bar or start practicing at least. For 8 years, you ran a legal tech company, and then now you finally have taken the bar and are starting to practice. Do I have that right?
Yes, and it really doesn't make much sense when you say it like that. And it's not an advisable strategy.
I'm curious, though, like, how do you feel about essentially embarking on your career in practicing law after you've been working in the legal tech industry with a law degree, but not practicing for 8 years?
Well, it's been interesting. I was at one point thinking people were going to start saying, wait a second, you have a law degree, you're not a lawyer, so what are you talking about? So this certainly helps me. I do enjoy what I'm doing because it's a combination of business and the law. And I now know a lot of the tools that I can use to make my practice technology enabled.
Mm-hmm. So you have just published your second book. This one you published yourself on Amazon, called The Data-Driven Law Practice. In episode 100, we talked in detail about law firm KPIs, what they are, which ones you should be tracking. We didn't touch a lot on the big picture of the implementation, and that's what your second book is about, is, okay, so what do you do with all these numbers, all this data you're collecting about your law firm? So maybe we could back up and talk about, what, in your mind, what does it mean for a law firm to be data-driven?
So in the book, I focus on a small firm and a solo as the examples, but I just wanted to start off by saying that you can use this approach and you can be data-driven in what you're doing, even if you're within a group within a larger law firm. And so my vision of this is that instead of coming in every day and kind of just getting on with business, you need to take a big step backwards in terms of what type of information you need in order to make decisions. It's as far back as how many hours do you want to work? What days of the week do you want to work? What's your vision for your firm? And once you know what you're trying to achieve, you can then figure out what data do I have to collect to see if I'm on the right path.
It is a way of answering questions about your firm.
It is, and it's a way that is better than your gut feel, which is, walking in every day, being super busy all day, and then at the end of the month wondering where all the money is. Like, that's just not data-driven.
That's a big picture view. Like, let's say we're collecting some or all of the KPIs that you've recommended on the website or in your previous book. Like, what does it actually look like to use that information? How do we collect it? And what kind of data are we trying to collect? How much time are we spending on it? And how are we using it? Like, what's the workflow look like, I guess, is what I'm curious about.
So I think each firm, it goes back to law school. It depends. Each firm will be different, and it is very much dependent on whether you have inside or outside administrative help. Because a lot of the data, you can automate how it's collected, but some of it, especially early on, you might have to have someone tracking, for example, phone calls, or someone tracking visits to the website and that type of information. So the way that both books actually are set up is with a process or a framework, so that you need to think, and you use the right word, you need to think of it in terms of a workflow. So you have clients that are either return clients or potential new clients. They're going to come to either your website or your firm. They're going to interact with you, and they're either going to go forward as a matter of some sort or not. And then you're going to do the work. Then you're going to bill them. And then hopefully you're going to close the matter and find out about their experience. So you need to look at that process. And there's data that goes with each of those steps. But really, first, you need to figure out, since you did ask how much time do you need to spend on this, well, you should figure out where your biggest pain points are first before you just start with an overall firm data approach.
So the idea is to try and describe your business processes or your client service processes with the numbers that describe that indicate that process, right?
Right. So you're going to collect, let's use an example.
Sure.
Like let's say you're going to look at your new clients. So if you want to figure out whether you're doing a good job of getting new clients, you first need to figure out how many people are finding out about you. How many people are you even talking to? And then where are those people coming from?
And I guess some of that information is really easy to collect from Google Analytics or something, but some of it may be harder, like how many people are you having lunch with each month, or how many people are attending your speaking events, or whatever it is that you do, right?
Exactly. And so what we tend to do is just kind of get on with our day and not really think, okay, wait, I had a speaking engagement where I spoke to 50 people in a room and, 7 people came up and gave me cards, but then other people came and phoned, I gave my contact information. So people phoned or they came to the website. You need to have a mechanism, whether it's on your website where it's just a little quick drop down box that says, how did you hear about our firm?
Well, and let's back up and talk to those lawyers who don't even have a website that they're making good use of, and for some reason are still listening to a podcast about law practice. But I hear that a lot, and I think that lawyers that don't have websites or aren't even starting to use those as in a way that they're thinking about collecting clients think, oh, well, this isn't for me. But just because your marketing is based on word of mouth doesn't mean that you can't use data to track it, right?
Correct. I mean, you could have no website and you could just be handing out cards with your phone number on it. And then whoever's answering the phone, whether it's you or whether it's an administrator, they should be asking in their first encounter with a client or a potential client, where did you hear about us? And then that way they can track it. That little piece of information is gold because, lawyers that do have websites, they get approached by people to do marketing campaigns or help them with their search engine optimization, SEO. So a lot of lawyers will just do that and they have no way of measuring whether the money they're spending on their marketing is actually working. So by knowing where your potential clients are coming from and tracking them through the client development process, you can at the end say, okay, hey, I spent this much money going to speak at the conference, and I got these 4 clients that I know came from the conference because I tracked it. There's my return on the investment in going to the conference.
There's been a lot of emphasis on tracking and return on investment and stuff in the world. And that's what we're talking about here is trying to track what you can. How do you factor in or how do you identify things that aren't so easy to track? For example, brand recognition is something that is really valuable and important, but it's really hard to track the value of it. And, we think about this on the podcast, for example, because telling somebody a URL during a podcast is not likely to be effective if they're sitting in their car and listening. So, but at the same time, we've had our vendors say, yeah, but a bunch of people came up to me and talked to me at the conference and said, hey, I heard about you on the Lawyers Podcast. I've been wanting to sign up, when that link was sitting in the show all along. And so I'm trying to figure out how do we talk about the value of that brand recognition versus, the actual trackable, here is this person and they made it all the way through my system and I can tell you how much money I made from them. It's that more vague sense of word of mouth marketing or what my reputation is worth, that kind of stuff.
And I think that sort of plays in here that if you do have a website or if you do have, somebody phoning in to say, yes, you should definitely ask them where they heard of you. And it might be just that I listened to a podcast. So in your options, you should have an other on your website to record such a thing. And that word of mouth often is more valuable. If you look at the Clio legal trends, they tell you that referrals and family is.
Well, I guess that brings up the question for me, though, of how clean does your data need to be? Because I used to ask that question of my potential clients all the time. Well, how did you find out about me? And most of them didn't know, even if they had eventually gotten to my website and filled out a contact form. They would say, I don't know, I think I saw you on Google somehow. But what really happened is they found a link on Google that didn't go to my website, that linked to a different website, that linked to a blog post, that linked to my website. But they actually, 3 weeks later, they found another blog post that answered a different question that they had, and that went to an outside website that linked to my website, and then they filled out a contact form. And so I don't even know how to attribute that to something, So how clean does it need to be?
It doesn't. So that gets back to, kind of an overriding caveat for KPIs is that they're indicators. They're not your financial reporting. It doesn't have to be perfect. Mm-hmm. But for your example, if I followed it, that would have been, you could put that under a web search. Mm-hmm. So having a web presence, whether it's your website or your content creation, you can dive deeper into it if you need to with that information. The key is to start getting some baseline data. So then if you do decide that you're going to invest in some sort of marketing campaign. You have something to compare it to.
But be careful about making fine distinctions that the data may not support.
Correct. It's one of those things that this is not your main job. You don't, we have the Clio, we have the Clio missing 6 hours. And the idea of this is to automate as much of it as you can and not make this your, taking up 4 hours of every day. I do suggest, like I mentioned, start with your biggest pain point. So if you're finding that you don't have a lot of new clients, then focus on that first. If you find that you don't have a lot of cash in the bank, but you're sending out lots of bills, then focus on your collections or your billing process. So it's one process at a time. And, you look at the data and then you make changes and you check back to the data. And that's the idea of data driven. You don't make changes based on your gut feel. It's based on the information.
And you're constantly trying new things and measuring them and then going back to them.
Yes.
Yeah,
and I'm not suggesting trying new things is not like new things to do with the substantive delivery of legal services.
Right.
It's
but it could be, right? Like, do we get better settlements when we send a collection letter or a demand letter early in the process or when we wait until after summary judgment?
Right. But the KPIs that I talk about are really more around the administrative or the back end and the delivery of legal services, not the actual, tactics, the legal tactics. But that's an excellent point. You can and should measure how effective your delivery is. And that will actually get measured kind of on the back end when you're doing a net promoter score, which I know there's been lots of chat on that. And I think it's critical.
Yeah. And I guess it's interesting because we've talked with Peter Prele and Natalie Worsfold from Countertax up in Canada, and they are trying to take this data-driven approach to litigation, which is an interesting podcast that you can go and find on our site if you'd like. So that would be kind of the other side of this as well. Mm-hmm. So we need to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to take a specific example. And Mary, I'm gonna give you kind of a hypothetical situation that I think a lot of our listeners find themselves in, which is you've got marketers cold calling you or knocking down your door, or you met them and maybe you even trust them, who are either trying to sell you on a website or a better website or SEO services or online marketing services, social media marketing, one of those things. And you're sitting there going, well, I get all my business from word of mouth marketing. How do I know if this is going to work? And I think one of the main ways to look at that would be trying to figure out how much it costs you to acquire a client now, and then bringing on one of those consultants for a test run and seeing how much it costs you to acquire a client that way. And so I want to talk about that specific number, which seems to me like, for marketing purposes at least, one of the most significant numbers lawyers can collect. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk about that.
Smokeball practice management software exists to streamline small law firms and reduce the stress of running a small business. With Smokeball, your firm is much more organized, productive, and profitable, meaning you and your staff can breathe easy with less stress. Visit smokeball.com/lawyerist today to learn more and book a demo. Like what you see? Lawyerist podcast listeners are eligible for 50% off onboarding. With Smokeball at your firm, it's less stress and more success. If you're not 100% happy with your law practice right now, chances are you want more. More income from your practice, more fulfillment from your work, and more freedom to enjoy your life. There's a new law business model that is allowing passionate attorneys to reclaim their lives and love practicing law again. Alexis Neely has been training lawyers for over a decade on the new law business model she created to build her own $1 million law practice. And now, the lawyers she has trained in that new law business model have their own high 6- and 7-figure law practices, all without sacrificing time with their families and only working with clients they love to serve. It is possible to experience the exhilaration of a thriving law practice, do the most meaningful legal work, have a real impact in your clients' lives, and have complete control over your schedule. Discover this new law business model now by watching the free video workshop series at newlawbusinessmodel.com/lawyerist. Did you know that attorneys who accept online payments get paid 39% faster on average than those who use traditional payment methods? With LawPay, the only payment solution offered through the ABA Advantage program, you can easily accept client payments online, via email, or in person. No equipment needed. Visit lawpay.com/lawyerist to sign up and get your first 3 months free. Trust the only payment solution developed for attorneys and recommended by 48 state bars. LawPay.
Okay, we're back. So, Mary, before we took a break, just to remind you and our listeners, I posed kind of a hypothetical of a lawyer who is trying to decide whether or not it's worth investing in the sometimes substantial bills that SEO consultants and online marketers will propose versus, right now it's my reputation, having lunch with other lawyers, my networking is getting all my business through word of mouth. And I feel pretty good about that. So I don't really know if this is worth investing in. So could we talk about what cost of acquiring a client is and how to calculate that so that you could start making that comparison between two different options?
Sure. And let's think of it as measuring the two options. So when you're calculating cost of client acquisition for what you're doing now, the key is that you have to factor in your own time. So for example, if, in a month, you would figure out how many hours did I spend on client development? And this is why I tell people it doesn't matter how you're billing, the recordable hour is not dead. So you should be recording your activity, including your non-billable activity, so that you can then do these types of analysis. It's part of the data-driven approach.
So I think I have my head around that. So like if I'm going out to lunch with another lawyer, I should start the clock when I get in my car to drive to lunch and stop my clock when I get out. What value do I use for that time?
Well, there's the key. You need to use your billing rate, not what, if you're a solo, not what you pay yourself. If you're, paid associate somewhere else, you're not using what you're paid, because the idea is if you weren't going to lunch, if you weren't going to a presentation, you could be billing. So, it's your billable rate. It's, on average, how much you are earning an hour from the client, not earning into your own bank account as payroll. So what that does is it allows you to compare the opportunity cost of you giving up that hour versus paying the search engine optimization person an amount to do marketing for you. So
what if you don't have a billable rate because you've moved past that? How do you think about that?
Well, if, for example, with Nimbus Legal, we don't have hourly rates. But I know on average how much I make an hour.
You
when
still
I
have a
do
concept
projects.
of how much you're worth.
Yeah.
Or you're doing flat fees wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It should not be the amount that you're necessarily being paid. That's the key. And because there's often a big difference, particularly if it's an associate or somebody who's a W-2 employee. As a solo or you're the partner, then just assign a value to it. Again, it gets back to the point we were talking about before the break. This doesn't have to be a precision exercise. It's order of magnitude. And the key is to put in that cost plus the hard costs. Like let's say you have to pay to speak at something, or you have to obviously pay for lunch. So those costs go in, and you compare all of the costs that you had that month to the number of new clients that you brought on that month.
My sense is that this will be an eye-opening number for a lot of small firms. Or a lot of people who have said, because I think most lawyers who rely on word of mouth marketing, which is most of us rely to one extent or another on it, and networking as our primary source of new clients, don't really account for our time in that equation. I think this will be an eye-opening thing.
It is. And years ago, when Billy Tarasio and I sat down, this is almost 5 years ago now, she had been doing some key performance indicators where she'd been saying, okay, I talked to X number of people in a month and I got Y number of clients. And so that's your conversion rate of your leads. But then we went through and I said, okay, well, how much time are you spending talking to these people? And we put in a number, and we were literally across the table from each other. And she was like, wow. So she
didn't swear.
No, well, I'm not going to tell. So she, and she's infamous now. She's made all of these changes. And part of what she did is figured, wait a second, I'm spending time on the phone with people asking basic triage questions that I could pay an administrator $15 an hour to do. And that becomes the cost of client acquisition. If somebody gets on the phone for 15 minutes with somebody and answers a bunch of questions to pre-qualify them instead of Billy getting on the phone and asking the same questions, because it's not practicing law. This is just information gathering.
I will say though that that was a great example. That what you just said is a great example of where you need more numbers to answer the full picture question. Because what you may find is having somebody else pick up the phone is it increases or it makes your time more valuable. But it's also possible that it makes your clients less happy with your firm. And so your net promoter score goes down the road. So you need to balance all of those things and find the right mix where your clients are happy, you're getting the best value out of your own time and out of your employees' times and your contractors' time and all that stuff, right? So you can't just have cost of acquiring a client or the cost of serving a client and then be done. You have to track more.
Exactly. But what Billy was finding is these weren't even clients yet. And some of them would never be clients that she could serve properly because they didn't have the means or it wasn't a complex enough matter. So she's got this triage process to use the different levels of service, of legal services that her firm provides. So you would then compare to, for the search engine optimization folks, you would be like, all right, right now we're getting this many leads through our website. And when we, implement the SEO, if we're paying them $10,000 a month, then you add in that $10,000 to your other costs of client acquisition. And that's why you have to have the source of the new clients. Right.
You can go to them and you can say, look, here's my current cost of acquiring a client. Can you beat it? And if you can't beat it, I don't want to, in fact, maybe, are you even willing to bet on it? Maybe you give them a different deal. I don't know. But then you can actually answer that question. But the reason I think it's going to be so eye-opening is I think most lawyers think their cost of acquiring a client is really low when it's actually quite high.
Exactly.
And when you compare it to online marketing, you may find that you can be cheaper there, which doesn't mean you stop word of mouth, but maybe it means you just change the way you think about your strategy. So
exactly. And it's kind of like I see a lot of lawyers wanting to do everything themselves, including something like their accounting. Mm-hmm. And it's the same opportunity cost. I don't understand why a lawyer who bills north of $300 an hour would be sitting there doing their own bookkeeping. Mm-hmm. Because I am a CPA. I do not do my own bookkeeping, nor do I do my own taxes. And because I can actually, it's leverage, right? I can make more money spending what would amount for more time for me than the professional bookkeeper because I don't use QuickBooks on a regular basis. Right. So it's that same kind of idea that you need to pick what it is that you're good at and where your time is best spent.
When you say that at the same time, that feels like kind of a cold analysis. We're like, if I think about what I want to be doing, I would be bored out of my mind doing the most valuable thing I can do nonstop, day in and day out. That's what I do. I clock into work. I do the most valuable thing I can do nonstop, and then I go home. I want some variety in my day. I want to feel like I'm addressing challenging projects and the things that I want to do. How do you balance that sort of value versus what I want to be doing or what I care about doing or what keeps me stimulated? I don't know. How do you think about that? Well,
it gets back to kind of starting with the end in mind. Every firm is different because some firms, they might not care. They're like, meh, I don't care how much money I make. I'm not that interested in maximizing my value. Or they might deliberately say, we're going to take on this many clients where, we break even. So it's what each individual lawyer wants to do. But again, you have to make that conscious decision based on data. Otherwise, you could be in for a rude awakening.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see the participants in the Lawyers Lab kind of go through the process of starting to track some numbers, talking to clients to get net promoter scores, and what they learn and the decisions that they're starting to make based off of that information. It's been neat to sort of witness that transformation happening over time. or even you dropped something when you mentioned Billy's firm, which I know Patrick Pallas has taken to kind of a whole new level. In a conversation we had in the lab, we talked about the way he's handling his intake line to try to identify, like, what is the problem this person has? What's the, can we put a value on their problem, and can we adjust the way that we handle them through intake, through service, whatever, that is well suited to what they're bringing to us, the case they're bringing to us, the need, the urgency that they're bringing to us, and still serve them in a way that makes them happy and comes out the other end. I think most lawyers just they try to bring the same level of service to every single client. And you briefly mentioned adjusting the level of service to suit the client, which I think is a revolutionary concept to a lot of lawyers too. What kind of data do you need to make those decisions?
Well, I think it does require you to get quite a bit of the Net Promoter Score data, because Patrick and Jordan, they've been doing the Net Promoter Score for years now. Mm-hmm. So, and your customer surveys don't have to be limited to Net Promoter Score. You can ask specific questions and drill down further than just the Net Promoter Score and the why or why not. And I know Billy did that, and she got valuable feedback in terms of, this is what worked for me and this is what didn't work for me. And you'll get themes out of that. And really, it's one of those things, you cannot redesign and, make your firm match your clients if you don't talk to your clients.
Right.
And it's something that lawyers, we've often there's a lot of lawyers who have often just sat back and said, well, they need me, they'll come to me, and this is what I offer. And I think it's that shift to the clients are going to look for the lawyers based on the word of mouth. So that's why it makes sense to do Net Promoter Score, because that's how likely someone is to refer you. So it's really just gathering the data, which is not quantitative in this case, it's qualitative data, is gold from the Net Promoter Scores, because it could be things that you don't even realize are happening within your firm.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about your book just a second, or just a minute, I guess. A second wouldn't be long enough. But I mentioned briefly in the intro, and you alluded to this. So you've sort of taken two imaginary firms that you put together with the help of some lawyers like Jordan and Billy and other people who have been on the podcast and people might recognize. But and then you've tried to sort of walk them through the process of collecting and using data to drive their decisions. And what is it? It's 100 and some pages of sort of an example of how to use KPIs and data in developing your law practice. Does that sound, have I described it fairly accurately?
Yes, it's got this start with the end in mind, and kind of walks things back from the first book, which was like a KPI framework with a lot of KPIs. This is more about how would you go into this process and divide up your problems into client problems, cash or collections problems, and then compensation for yourself and your people. And, how to do process review, because I see a lot of attorneys excited to buy technology and buy all this stuff without first understanding their process.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about that as much, but yeah, your book is built on the idea that you shouldn't need technology to do this, which I think is an important message for people to hear, because when they hear data, they think, robots and machine learning and technology. But what it really means is at most a spreadsheet and collecting some numbers from things. And
some Post-its and a wall.
Yeah.
That's a Post-its, pens, and a wall. So when I did the book, I actually used Post-its, and some talented people made them into these cool graphics, not me. But I did actually use Post-its when I do it. And with Nimbus Legal, we're doing this right now. We're designing, because we're a group of counsel, so we have to design our processes as opposed to fixing existing processes. But it's this technique, you can talk about design thinking and some of these other things all day long. This is just basically, looking at processes. And this is something that I did over a quarter century ago.
Yeah, totally.
As a consultant.
Well, so if you're interested in Mary's books, the link is in the show notes. So will be the links to episode 100 with Mary, where we talk a lot more in depth about KPIs. Lens episode 16 with Patrick Pallas, where he talks about his intake process. If you want to do more reading or listening or watching before you tackle the subject yourself. So, Mary, thank you so much for being with us and walking through data-driven law practice.
Well, thanks again for having me, Sam.
Make sure to catch next week's episode of the Lawyerist Podcast by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast app. And please leave a rating to help other people find our show. You can find the notes for today's episode on lawyerist.com/podcast.
The Lawyerist Podcast is produced with help from Lindsay Calhoun and edited by Paul Fisher. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not endorsed by Legal Talk Network. Nothing said in this podcast is legal advice for you.